And now, watch this. If I just lightly tap right here, I can very easily just create the illusion of a well-worn edge, like something that's been hit with a hammer or it's scraped against something, and I'm just lightly just tapping it like that. In this tutorial, we are going to be making these chips and scrapes and little nicks and, you know, the stuff that really gives the anvil its character. So this same method could be used for cars, robots, a whole bunch of things. It's adding surface detail, and it's needed for a lot of things that you model. So yeah, this is where we finished at the end of the last video. We have UV unwrapped our beautiful anvil, which is great. Now we're going to do some sculpting. Now for my my more experienced viewers out there might be wondering, why on earth why did we do the UV unwrapping first and now we're going to do sculpting? Surely it should be the other way around. Well, actually, we are going to be sculpting on a separate mesh, and then we're going to be baking that detail in the next video onto the mesh that we have here. So we've UV unwrapped it for a reason, so that when we do the baking it's okay. But yeah, in this video, let's do some sculpting, okay? And if that made no sense to you, don't worry. That's just for the people that did understand it. Okay, so we do not need the UV image editor. So I'm going to collapse that, or just make it the properties bar. That's good. And we're going to change this to solid view. And before we do any sculpting at all, I just want to make one little change to our mesh here, because I noticed that looking at a lot of reference photos that actually this edge here is a little bit too soft. Like if you look at this reference photo, for example, you can see that edge there is pretty tight, and I think it's usually used, like it has to be pretty sharp, because what do they do with it? They like hammer stuff with it, and it has to make it like a 90-degree angle, and if it was smooth it wouldn't quite work as well. Anyways, all that is to say is I'm just going to grab this edge here by holding down Alt and clicking, which is a good reminder. Turn on that screen keys tool, and I'll just deselect those two vertices there so that they don't move. Double tap G, and that's going to slide it up. And then I'm just going to do the exact same thing here. Double tap G, good. This one here as well. Deselect that one and that one. Double tap G, and look at that. We have a nice tight edge, and it looks extra sharp. Just one thing though, make sure that because that's part of the edge that's part of that circle, so we don't want that to move. But that's good. Okay, that looks extra sharp and good. So, I mentioned something about baking. So we're going to do it in the next video, but it's important at this stage that you take a copy of this mesh and move it to a new layer. So we're going to hit Shift D, then hit Escape, and then I'm going to hit M to move it, and I'm just going to move it to the second layer. Okay, so layer 1 and layer 2, you'll have the exact same mesh. So on layer 1, this is the only one we're going to work on for this tutorial, but we're going to do all the sculpting, and we're going to do it all messy, and we won't care that we're ruining the UV map that we did in the last tutorial, that we're making a mess of everything, because we're just going to bake it in the next video. And if baking doesn't make any sense, don't worry, it will when we get there. Okay, so we're going to do some sculpting. Now, if we were to just jump and do some sculpting like right now, what you would find is that there's not a lot of detail here, right? And that's because it's working off of this detail that we have here, and it's not a lot of detail. So what we want to do instead is apply our subsurf modifier. And now, once it is applied, now when you draw, you can see that you have more detail to work with. Now, one thing before we get into any of the details, you'll notice that, actually, have I? Oh no, that's fine. You'll notice that if you look at the reference photos, that like on this one here, you can see that, by the way, these reference photos, if you want them, link to that is in the YouTube description. But it's got like what appears to be like hammering all over it. So it's just like wobbly, bent. It's just a bent piece of metal, right? Like that's the anvil's job, is to just get hit with hammers all day long. So it's just got marks all over it. So you could do that with the Sculpt brush, you know, dun, 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 dun. But that's quite tedious, and as artists, we want to be lazy. That's the way to it, because that's when you actually do time-saving things. So so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to add a displacement modifier right here, which will make it look inflated. But we're going to give it a new texture, which will make it look deflated. And then go to the texture panel here, change it to displacement texture, change it from image to clouds, and now you can see what we're aiming for. The strength is way too high by default, so I'm going to drag that down to a really low value. And I actually think something around 0.015 is going to do the job. So it's just a light battering all the way over. Not too much, because you don't want there to just be detail uniformly across everything. That's really what the sculpting thing is going to be for. But this is just, you know, a light battering. So I'm going to hit apply on that, which means that it's now actually going to be part of our wireframe. They'll be very slightly bent around. Okay, cool. So sculpting. Let's do some sculpting. Now that we've got all this ready, if I just start drawing here, you will see that I am drawing and sculpting into our mesh. So sculpting, right? All the options are in the toolbar, which you enable and you access by hitting T on your keyboard. Now, the first thing to note is that as you draw here, you'll notice that it's drawing it in two places. It's sculpting here, but it's also sculpting there. Why is that? It's almost like it's got a mirror modifier applied. Well, it's not the mirror modifier, but it is underneath here when you're sculpting. By default, it's got the option mirror X turned on in symmetry, which wouldn't be a bad thing if, you know, every single asset you worked on was on the correct axes, but it's often not, and sometimes you don't want things mirrored. So I personally think it shouldn't be on by default. It should be off. In our case, though, what we do actually want, we do want it mirrored, but we don't want it left to right like that. We want it across the Y axis. So I'm going to click Y, and now when I draw over here, you can see it's drawing it over there. So this is obviously the way it's supposed to go, because yeah, even though, you know, technically you shouldn't, like if there's a dent on this side, there's not necessarily going to be a dent on the exact same spot on the other side, but it will be so unnoticeable from the point of view of the camera that, and it'll save you so much time, you won't have to do double the work over here, that it's definitely worth doing. So that's why we're going to do it. Okay, so as you draw, as you sculpt, you know, I'm just clicking as I do this, you'll see that it's actually physically changing the geometry. So that's what the sculpt tool will do, which, you know, might sound like, oh, you know, why is that such a big deal? Well, you often work so much with modifiers and things that it's rare to see the geometry actually moving around, but it is. But what that means is that it's actually going to base it off of what you've got in the wireframe here. So that means that if I was to draw right here, for example, you can see that it's quite blocky. And the reason for that is that there isn't a lot of detail here. Whereas if I was to draw right here, there's still not a fantastic amount of detail. But there is more there because we've got more detail along that edge. So that's actually quite annoying. If you are a sculpting person, if you're a sculpting artist, actually I can move that out the way now, you don't want to have to think about the detail. Like as you're sculpting wherever, you want to be able to put, you know, some detail here, detail up here, and you don't want to have to think about, you know, is there enough underlying detail underneath it? So there is an awesome tool in the sculpting tool, this toolbar right here. Right here, there's one called Dyne Topo, which stands for Dynamic Topology. And what it does is if you enable it, it'll give you a scary warning, and that's because we've got UV unwrapping information part of the mesh, but doesn't matter. Which, if you enable this, it will destroy that information. Doesn't matter because we've got it on layer 2. Ours is fine. But when you use Dynamic Topo, what it will do is it will dynamically retopologize the mesh as you draw. What does that mean? Well, instead of it actually using this wireframe information here, you can see that on the area that I drew there, it's hard to tell because it's almost the same level of detail as that, but it's actually adding in detail. And what that means, and it's based off of where you are, like how close you are to the mesh. So if I was to zoom in further, like right here, and if I was to, oh, did I lose it? I did. If I was to draw it again, you can see that I'm able to get extra detail on that little point right there. So it's really a really powerful feature. They have the same thing in ZBrush. It's great when you're just trying to work out the shape of something. You don't want to have to worry about the topology or any of that stuff. You just want to just put stuff in there, knock holes in it, add detail where it is that you're sculpting. So it's like you're working with a piece of clay, because somebody working with a piece of clay, they don't have to worry about, is there enough detail in this clay? It's clay. So that's what this essentially does. So it's great for that. Now, the lower that you set this value here to, the more detail you get, because it's based off of, you know, how close you are to the objects. So it's the number of pixels on your screen that is required before it uses another level of detail. I think that's the best way to think of it. So instead of 12, I'm going to set this to 2. And now, when I draw here, you will see that I'm getting a much finer level of detail, right? If you go into edit mode, look at that. So that's why this is so powerful. You don't have to worry about the detail anymore. It's just doing it all automatically, and it's just crazy. You won't have to keep checking the box, by the way. It's just because I keep hitting undo, so it undoes that as well. Oh, and click smooth shading as well, so you don't have to see the ugly wireframe underneath it. Okay, so we talked about symmetry. We talked about dynamic topology. That's good. The brush. The main brush. So that is the most important thing, I guess, as you're sculpting something. The default one is this one called Sculpt Draw, which sort of like if you're drawing something with a paintbrush, it'll draw it and raise it to that level. If you'll see that there's an add and then there's a subtract button there. If you hold down Control, and this works for any of the brushes, if you hold down Control and then draw, it will do the opposite of whatever this is set to. So it's set to add, so holding down Control makes it subtract. And if I set it to subtract and then hold down Control, it will add. Hopefully that makes perfect sense. So basically, as you're sculpting, it's very common to, you know, click, click, control, click, control, control, click, 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 and to switch between the two very, very often. So I'll be doing that as I work. Just, yeah, I know there's a lot of talking and you're thinking, come on, get on with it. But I'm just trying to explain it because this is, for a lot of people, the sculpting introduction. Anyways, the one brush that I'm going to use a lot in this video is the Flatten Brush. And the reason it's so cool and the reason we're going to use it is because it's good for like right on this edge here. If I just click and go like that, you'll see the effect that it's having. It's almost like it's been hit with something because it's flattening out that corner. Really, really powerful. So what I want you to do is to just work your way along the anvil and just add a few places where it has been hit. Now, the reason I say a few is that it's very tempting when you look at this to go like, oh, sweet. This looks really cool. I'll do heaps of these, right? And just like do this all the way along. The problem is that if you do it too much, like let me show you what I mean, right? If you just do the same chip, like all the way along repeatedly, after a while, it doesn't have any meaning anymore. So I got this tip from a ZBrush talk that I'll actually put the link in the description if you want to watch it. It was by the guys at Blizzard who made Overwatch, and they were talking about their character design and how they have areas of quiet and then areas of detail. So the areas where there's not much, like a quiet area, is an area for your eyes to rest on, and then the areas of detail is something for your eyes to focus on. But you don't want to just have detail everywhere because it's too much for the eye to take in. It doesn't know how to read the character very well, and that applies to everything, not just characters. It applies to assets, it applies to composition, architecture, a whole bunch of things. So I want you to just very sparingly find a few places to put and do them at different sizes as well. So do little ones, do little chips. This shortcut key that I'm using here, by the way, is F, which is changing the radius, the size of it. So you just hit F and then drag it bigger or smaller depending on what you want. Or you can change it up there as well. Now at this stage, I should also talk about tablets. Dun dun dun, tablets. I know some of you watching, you've only got a mouse, and you're like, no, don't make me have to buy something else. You don't need a tablet for this tutorial. You can get by just fine just by clicking. The only reason I want to bring up a tablet is that they are so, so useful, and they will rapidly speed up the amount of time, speed up the time that you have to spend sculpting, and it'll allow you, excuse me while I throw my tea bag away, to get better results. Because, for example, here, if I wanted there to be a different sized chip, I would have to click many times. I would have to turn down the strength, like if I want there to be a subtle one, and just click a lot, right? However, if I'm using a tablet, see that little button next to it? That enables the tablet pressure, which means the more that the harder that I click on it, you can see with more force there, it's giving it more and more strength. So I can very quickly, without having to click multiple times and set that value really low, I can decide right here, like I want a really big one, and then I want just a really light one, a really small one, and then a really deep one, you know, and I can do all that just by pressing. And it's so natural because it's, you know, everybody's used to drawing with a pencil, and the harder you push something. So it's not essential. And if you're just getting started in Blender, I would recommend not buying a tablet until you are sure that, for one, you're even going to continue with Blender, because, you know, you don't want to be one of those people that just rushes. Like, I knew a friend in high school. I won't call him by name, he might be watching, but he decided he was really into mountain biking, and he went out and bought a really good mountain bike, helmet, pads, convinced his whole family to buy all these mountain bikes, and then within about a month he'd given it up. And then they just sat in the garage, I'm assuming, gathering dust. So you don't want to be like that with your hobbies. Make sure that before you go out and buy a tablet that you actually do want one. Yeah, this one, by the way, this is a Wacom Intuos. If you're curious what mine is, it's just a tablet. The link for this specific one is in the YouTube description. But really any tablet will really do the trick. You know, Christmas, you know, it's September now. Christmas is a few months away. Maybe you could put it on your list. Maybe someone will buy it for you. You know, there are worse Christmas presents. There are a lot worse Christmas presents. I'm actually thinking this year, be the first year, I'm thinking of just telling everybody, don't buy me any gifts, like for my family, because I was thinking about like the economics of present giving, right? Like when I was a little kid, I remember my granddad, he was like, nah, I don't want to buy anybody any presents. And so we call him the Scrooge, like Scrooge, ruining Christmas, you know. But now as I'm an adult, I'm like, wait a minute. It makes so much more sense for you to buy your own gifts than for someone to buy it. Because like they did this study where they had a bunch of school kids, and they went out and they randomly gave each of the school kids a treat. Like, it was an American study, so they had, like, you know, Mars bars, Baby Ruth, Fig Newtons, Nerds, a whole bunch of different lollies. And then at the end of it, they got the kids to rate how satisfied they were with the thing that they were given. And on average, the average rating out of 10 for a lolly that they were given for free was 5. And the reason for that is that some kids didn't like Mars bars. Some kids, Mars bars were their favorite thing ever. Some kids really hate sour things, and so they got a sour lolly. And so they had lower ratings. And then they gave the kids the opportunity to swap their candy with another one. And they had like 60 seconds to do it. And then the average rating went up to like a 9. Which is crazy, and it's simulating the economics of gift giving, which I thought was fascinating, because I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like, if I was to go and buy my wife a gift, I know her better than anyone else does, and yet chances are, if I was to spend $50 on her, I would not buy the same thing that she would have bought for herself if she had $50 to spend for herself. So it's like, it's a waste on the economy. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think of gift giving. I don't know, I'm very curious. Like, I think it's one of those traditions which we should just leave to die. Like, it's obviously the incentive is put there to do it by people that are making money at Christmas time. It's every company. And of course, every Christmas, no one's gonna talk about the effects of gift giving. And anyways, just gonna get off my little soapbox here. Just killing some time whilst I do this sculpting. Okay, so I didn't abide by my own rule there, and I overdid this area here. So here's another little keyboard shortcut. If you hold down Shift and then as you draw it, that is going to smooth it out. So it's the exact same thing as if you were to select smooth there. It's just a short key for it. So it's holding down Shift as you draw, and it will do that. It's a good idea not to smooth everything though. They say that's a common mistake for beginners, is that they try and like smooth out their mistakes, and then you end up with just like a really smoothed out looking thing, and it doesn't look right. So you don't want to do that. So use smooth sparingly. Okay, so I've got a few little chips, and now I'm just going to choose a few of them just to make really big, bold areas. Another one right here. Okay, and that is pretty good. Okay, so you can see, like, by doing it sparingly, you give more emphasis to the dents. And using like varied amounts, like small ones and then big ones, yeah, it gives more character to it, and yeah, it doesn't have like a uniform look to it. That's the whole point of sculpting, is it gives it an organic, hand-drawn sort of feel, or like not hand-drawn, but like hand-drawn attention. I don't know, because like there's so many things in CG that are like generated, procedural textures and things like that, and we use that because it's so much work doing everything by hand. But sculpting is the one area where you can really give it that look as though it's yeah, it's not done by a computer, like it's actually hand sculpted. So that's why we're doing it. Okay, now you can see, by the way, at this point right here, like where the areas come together, you can see that looks really obvious because that is mirrored, right? So instead of that, what I will do is I'll just turn off, whoops, not dynamic, the symmetry, just turn it off whilst I'm working on this area, so that I can just draw on one side and not the other, and it'll look better than if I hadn't done that. Okay, I'm going to do fast. I'm going to do a sped up thing now while I just finish this same thing for the rest of the mesh here. Oh, one other thing to mention before I jump to that is matte cap. So like right down here, you can see I'm about to start sculpting, and it's very hard to see the detail because of the way that the mesh is shaded. So if you go up to shading here by hitting N, that's in the N for properties, then click matte cap. This enables you to change how it looks in the viewport. So it's not adjusting the material, it's not changing anything to do with how it's going to look when it's rendered. This is purely just so that you can visualize it on your screen better. So really, you just pick one which makes sense. Like, I generally work with this pink one because it looks, has quite nice shading on it. But yeah, it's really just pick whichever one you need in order to get the job done. All right, fast time. Okay, so I've done those little hits pretty well all over it, except for this back edge here, but I can do that later. You'll notice that I haven't done it on these underside ridges here. Those are perfectly clean, and the reason for that is that it wouldn't make sense for there to be hammering on the underside of the anvil unless the anvil was flipped for some strange reason. So make sure that and this goes for texturing, modeling, anything you do, it has to make physical sense first. Like, it has to fit a purpose. So think of somebody using this. Where would they actually hit it? Don't just start battering it just all over like we did with the displacement at the start. But you know what I mean. Like, just think about it carefully. Otherwise, you will end up with a very boring looking asset with just uniform damage all over it. Excuse me. So, what I'm going to show you now is just adding some detail to this horn here. Because you'll notice if you use the Flatten Brush, like, it doesn't really work that well. And also, you get this sort of ribbed look here. So if I change it back to the Sculpt drawer, and if I hold down Control, this is where you're actually going to start using the Control. If I, do a few hits here, I can start to basically give it the look as though it's been hit with a hammer. However, I keep getting this ribbed look there. And I don't know the exact reason that it does this, but I think it's because it is a curved cylinder. It's that when you actually do the hit right there, it has to retopologize it, and somehow, because it's a round cylinder, you see those edges there. So what I just do is I just hold down Shift and I just paint over them, and that's going to smooth them out there. I'm sure somebody could explain to me why this specific shape, it has problems retopologizing, but yeah. So even though I've got that Dynatopo smooth shading thing turned on, it was still a problem. So anyways, hey, why is that? Was Dynamic Topo not turned on before? That's weird. Okay, no, it is there. Okay, for some reason Dynamic Topo just turned off, and I wasn't sure if I had it turned off for the whole thing. I'm sure I would have noticed. But anyways, I'll just smooth this out. Just continue smoothing it out. And it's like once the detail is in there and once it's been smoothed out, then it's okay. So then you can switch back to the Sculpt Draw, Dynamic Topo, and now I can do those little hammer hits, and there's not really a problem there. That part is new, so I have to do that. But yeah, so just do a few hits along here. You might want to turn off the symmetry where it gets closer to the seam so that it doesn't look too repeated, you know what I mean? Smooth it out a bit, and you're just making it look like it's been hammered. Look at that. So authentic. Alright, cool. What else can I talk about? I already talked about presents. Oh, hey, speaking of presents, I don't know if it could be classed as a present, but yeah, I'm going to be a dad. How about that? I just posted it on Instagram yesterday. But yeah, my wife's pregnant, having a baby girl in February. So yeah, look forward to less tutorials from me in February. But yeah, that's on the way. So that's something. Cool. Hey, now it's starting to look good, I think. Good. Alright, so what I'll do now is I'm going to turn off Dynamic Topo, and I'm just going to add a few extra hits to the side here. So holding down Control, and I'm just bashing it in. Now the reason I'm turning it off is that if you have Dynamic Topo turned on, and then I was to paint it near these edges here, you'll get like distortion, because it will try to retopo this high detailed area, which I don't want. So because I'm doing this after I've already done some sculpting with the Dynamic Topo, I am just making sure that I'm not losing that detail. So I'm turning off Dynamic Topo. Alright, cool. Holding down Control, just do a few hits along here. Again, not uniform all the way over, but oh gosh, sorry. Alright, a couple of hits here. Oh, I gotta turn on symmetry again, I guess. That's annoying when you forget that you've had it turned off for a while, and then the other side doesn't have any of that detail that you did. But alright, it's not too bad. This is the lazy part anyway, where you just hit it a few times. Cool. Now the other thing that I will do is I will use the tool which is called the pinch tool, and I will just go along these edges here, and I'll just sharpen out those edges. Let me just center this. There we go, so it's easier to rotate around it. Okay. Why is that not working? Oh, I'm magnifying it by holding down Control. Okay, don't hold down Control while you're doing the pinch thing, because it will flip it and it'll be magnified, which will not look right. But you can see the look that I'm doing there. So I'm just giving a sharpened edge to those areas there. Now in the next step, we're going to be adding in some texture detail so that these don't look stylized. But yeah, let's do another time lapse while I finish off and complete this detail bit. Okay, so I've pretty well finished the main part, the main hits, where it's been hit with a hammer. Now what I'm going to do is add in some slight detail inside these crevices. And the reason for that is that if you have a look at the reference photos, you can see that wherever there's been a hit or a chip, that the surface underneath is very porous. It's this jaggedy bit. It's not totally smoothed like ours is. So ours right now is sort of looking like this would sort of suit an Overwatch character, you know, like a stylized sort of look, but I want to go for photorealism, okay? So I am going to be adding in some detail. So here's how to add some text. Like you could, you know, go in here and like just very carefully dot, but I mean, that's going to be a nightmare and it's never going to look very good. But if you were to go to the properties, go to the texture panel over here, what I'm going to do is with the Sculpt brush enabled, I'm going to go underneath texture, I'm going to click new, and then over here I'm going to select that new texture that I've created, and then I'm going to select clouds. So here what I can do is if I click on ramp, I can change, like if it's not like that, like basically as I'm drawing, like it'll do the clouds, but it's sort of like a uniform, just, it's not very good. And also, by the way, it's tiling. So the first thing you want to do is get rid of that tiling effect. So I'm going to change this, instead of it being to view plane, which is the brush mapping default, I'm going to change it to random, which means I believe it's going to choose a random part of the texture every time it's used across the surface. So it doesn't have that awful, yeah, what I had going on just there for a second. The other thing I want to do is, enable ramp. And now I can choose, so now the areas that it actually paints with is a lot more noticeable. It's not that grayish thing. It's giving like severe parts that are down and then severe parts which are popping out. So yeah, and you can see that this is set to add right now. So as I draw, it's adding to it. If I hold down control, it's going to be subtracting to it. And the subtract is really what's going to give it a lot of the shape that we want. So with this done, what I'm going to do is in here, and you'll remember with the dynamic topo that the closer you get to it, the more detail it's going to add to that area. If I'm to draw right here, you can see I can very quickly just add in some detail. Now, this cloud level here, you can see that at this level, like if you zoom out to here, that detail is too fine. We don't want the detail to be that fine, so I'm going to undo it. And what I'm going to do, there's a couple of ways you could change the scale of it. One of them would just be to use a smaller brush or a larger brush, right? Because that's the actual texture. You can see the texture underneath it. But I don't want to have to use a gigantic brush because then I would have to be all the way back here to use, no, all the way in to use it. Instead, what I want to do is change the size of it right here. So I'm just going to turn that way up to about 1. And now when I draw with it, you can see that it's a lot chunkier, right? I could go down a size if I want it to be a little bit finer. Now you can sort of see how that's going to look. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So I am going to continue this all the way around. So I'm subtracting and I'm adding as I draw. So I'll add a little bit and I'll subtract a little bit. And just try and make it look like my reference photo right in here. Again, these reference photos, if you want them, YouTube description, there's a little zip file for you there. But anyways, time-lapse time. Let's finish it. Okay, so at this point of the sculpt, I've noticed that I've sort of run out of detail on some of these areas. So I am going to drop the dynamic topper one more level down to 1 pixels, which is going to give me double the amount of detail where I put the brush, right? So yeah, again, don't go overboard because otherwise it will look funny when you zoom out. Actually, that does kind of look a little bit funny. So maybe I'll just turn up this size a little bit. But yeah, I do want there to be some detail, but just not too much detail. So it's just getting that blend. So zooming out, zoom in, just make sure that it looks right. And there we go. We have finished our sculpt. We've added in some tiny amounts of noise / looking detail in the crevices or whatever. A few don't have it, some does, some didn't. If I was making this for a game, I might spend a little bit extra time really going in there, but this is like the 6th time I've done this today, and it looks pretty good, honestly. So that's just gonna do it for us, guys. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. In the next video, we are gonna be taking that detail and then baking it onto this so that we get the detail from our high poly mesh, but the joy of a low poly mesh. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. So if you want to watch that, click it right there, and I will see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.